On this day, in 1979, Britain's first ever female Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, took office. This video will take a look at her reign, the lasting impacts of her time in office, and why she confuses my feminism so much. So, Thatcher had been involved in Conservative politics since she was at Oxford University. She was the president of the Conservative Association and I bet she was fun at parties, don't you? After she graduated, she worked as a chemist and a barrister, before becoming the MP for Finchley in 1959. And she got her first cabinet position in 1970 as Education Secretary. During this time, she ended a programme which provided free milk to school children, which is why you might have heard her called Margaret Thatcher, the Milk Snatcher. 5 years later, she became leader of the Conservative Party to everyone's surprise. And things were not going great for Britain in the 1970s. Watch my video on the 9th of February if you want to know a bit more about the state of emergency that was called. Oil prices had risen, unemployment and inflation rose as Britain entered a double-dip recession. Coal miners went on strike for better pay, leading to the 3-day week, and what that meant was that there was only enough power for commercial premises to use it 3 days a week. The coldest winter in 16 years followed, and that led to the winter of discontent where people couldn't heat their homes and they were just downright miserable. There was absolutely no way that Labour could hold on to power, and they didn't. On this day in 1979, Margaret Thatcher became the first female leader Europe had ever seen. And she was strong. She had opinions. She wasn't afraid to go against the grain and make enemies to get shit done. She was known as the Iron Lady. She sounds awesome. And if she'd have been anyone else, she might have been. But she wasn't. She was Thatcher. And her motto was, there is no such thing as society. I mean, she'd inherited quite the shit show and she didn't really know what to do either, but by God, she was decisive about it. This lady is not for turning, she famously said. Inflation had been about 25% in the late 1970s, and the Bank of England says that this should be about 2 to 4% on their website. I'm not an economist, tell me if I'm wrong, but what I do know is 25% is rate high. So Thatcher's first mission was to bring this down. She implemented budget cuts, which saw an immediate recession, but there was a boom later on in the decade, which luckily she was still also in office for. She increased interest rates, which sucked. Unemployment rose from 1.3 million when she took office to 3 million by 1986, and in 1980 she introduced the Right to Buy scheme. What this meant was that people could buy their council houses at a discount of up to 70%. Great! You get to own your own home. The government gets some much needed funds. Everybody's happy. The only problem was that the government didn't build more council houses after that. So in 1975, 80% of housing expenditure was spent on construction of social housing. By 2000, 85% was spent on housing benefit. So you can see that this meant before Thatcher, the government had assets, it had houses. Now, the government just pays private landlords to house us, which is part of the reason we're in the mess that we are in now. Thatcher was re-elected in 1983, and it's odd because she wasn't very popular in some respects, given that, unemployment and interest rates had doubled. And yet she won a landslide victory. She'd won the 74-day Falklands War against Argentina in 1982. Not her personally, obviously, although I'd have mad respect for her if she did. But, the Labour Party were in shambles and she just kind of won. Anyway, she was back for round 2, and that's when she decided to take it to the miners. She began closing uneconomical mines And there was another miners' strike in 1984. But she had learnt from the miners' strikes of the 1970s and she'd stockpiled fuel. She regarded the strikers as the enemy within. She sent in the riot police, she refused to negotiate, and she crushed the unions. Entire communities that had built up around the mines, especially in the northeast, were destroyed, and many areas still haven't recovered from this. There's no such thing as society, eh? Thatcher was also responsible for privatising more than 40 state-owned businesses, and, well, it doesn't really sound like a lot, but that was apparently the equivalent of £60 billion worth of state assets. These companies were things like British Telecom, British Gas, British Airways, British Steel, British Rail. Well, the trains were privatised under her successor, John Major, but, they were the same party. The thought was that privatising these industries would make them more efficient, and I don't know if you've had to pay a bill or get a train recently, but I don't think the plan worked. But Thatcher is dead, and even if she was alive, I think she'd be fresh out of fucks to give about that. Manufacturing, that fell under Thatcher too, our output, as she outsourced industry abroad because it was cheaper. Again, not much thought as to the long-term implications of how removing industry and jobs would affect the country. But why would that concern her? In 1989, she tried to introduce the poll tax, and people hated the idea. Its official name was the community charge, and I guess it was like council tax, really. So previously, you paid based on the value of your house, but Thatcher's vision was for a flat rate per head. People took to the streets. They didn't like it, and the Conservative Party had just about had enough of her. She left her post on the 28th of November 1990, and she remains the longest-serving British Prime Minister of the 20th century. She died of a stroke at the Ritz Hotel on the 8th of April 2013, and that week, Ding Dong, The Witch is Dead reached number 2 in the charts. The BBC refused to play it in full. People said that it was disrespectful, but honestly, she sold our industry and all of our housing off with no plan for our future. She destroyed communities. She is part of the reason for a lot of our problems today. It's hard to feel sad for a woman who did all that and died at the age of 87 in a hotel that is synonymous with luxury. Her funeral cost £3.6 million. The least you can do is allow the common folk a little ding-dong on the radio. And, Thatcher confuses my feminism because in many ways I do admire her. She was strong. She did what she wanted to do. She stood up for herself and what she believed in. She had a backbone. She was a trailblazer. She had such a great opportunity to be amazing. Some people think she was amazing, but I just feel really disappointed. Anyway, thank you for watching. Why not subscribe? And I'll see you tomorrow.